It's the Beth Cahill Show. And now, here's Beth.
Good morning and welcome to the Beth Cahill Show. Thank you for tuning in today. So much to get into. We have the coronavirus, Super Tuesday, the Democratic debate from last week. I want to start today, though, with the coronavirus. It has been all over the news all week long. So I thought it might be helpful if we went through some of the key points surrounding it, kind of get rid of the background noise, and just go through what we know so far and what's important. We know that the coronavirus has made its way now to every continent except Antarctica. The United States has a confirmed 61 cases so far. And fortunately for the United States, there have been no deaths up to this point. There have been other countries that have not been this fortunate. California has just experienced the first case that looks to have been community spread. So what is community spread, right? We keep hearing that word everywhere. What it means is that no one knows the origin of how this person contracted the virus. So up to this point, all of the confirmed cases, there was, sort of a trail that told health officials how it had been contracted, whether that person had been traveling to China or they had contact with someone that had traveled abroad who may have had contact with another person that was infected. There was always this trail that led health officials to how it was contracted. The case in California is unique and is a little worrisome just because the profile doesn't fit how we have seen it so far. So yeah, it's a bit worrisome, a little more than other cases purely just because they can't track it. The coronavirus has now caused, stock markets to take a dive. So besides just the obvious ramifications of people's health concerns, because that's a big one, it's affecting the economy as a whole as well. The president held a press conference this week appointing Vice President Mike Pence to lead this response task force on the coronavirus. And I want you to listen to him here from his press conference earlier this week.
We have, through some very good early decisions that were actually ridiculed at the beginning, we closed up our borders to flights coming in from certain areas that were hit by the coronavirus and hit pretty hard. And we did it very early. A lot of people thought we shouldn't have done it that early, and we did, and it turned out to be a very good thing. And the number one priority from our standpoint is the health and safety of the American people, and that's the way I viewed it when I made that decision. Because of all we've done, the risk to the American people remains very low. And we have the greatest experts in the world, really in the world, right here. The people that are called upon by other countries when things like this happen. We're ready to adapt, and we're ready to do whatever we have to as the disease spreads, if it spreads. And what I've done is I'm going to be announcing exactly right now that I'm going to be putting our Vice President, Mike Pence, in charge. And Mike will be working with the professionals, doctors, and everybody else that's working. The team is brilliant. I spent a lot of time with the team over the last couple of weeks, but they're totally brilliant, and we're doing really well. And Mike is going to be in charge, and Mike will report back to me. But he's got a certain talent for this.
So there was a lot of pushback on Capitol Hill from Democrats about Mike Pence being the right choice for this, right? There was even some pushback from, our very own Governor Jay Inslee of Washington State, who decided he wanted to politicize a phone call from the vice president so that Jay Inslee could have something catchy to tweet about. I want to read you his tweet, and I quote, "I just received a call from Vice President Mike Pence thanking Washington State for our efforts to combat the coronavirus. I told him our work would be more successful if the Trump administration stuck to the science and told the truth." End quote. I mean, can you believe this guy? Have some class, especially when this state is dealing with a ton of problems right now that he can't get a handle on. The arrogance from Governor Jay Inslee, even though he couldn't get past the 1% mark while attempting to run for president, is still quite astounding to me. Mike Pence was a good choice here, and here's why. Mike Pence is very level-headed. He does not get into the political fray. He doesn't get into name calling. He really just is someone who has been known to steer clear of the gutter politics that we see all the time now. It's all we see. It doesn't matter whether there's a national health crisis or whether we're dealing with terrorism overseas. There is always gutter politics and everything is politicized. Mike Pence doesn't do that. That is why he is the right person to run this. America is looking for leadership in times like this. It's time that our country backs out of the politics, back out of election mode for just a moment, and help calm the fears of the American people, because that is their job. I do believe that Mike Pence will do just that. The effects of the economy, though, have been far-reaching. We have stocks hurting because investors are basically worried about the consumers. So while the American consumer is still strong, and it is today, as I do this show, the spread of the coronavirus can lead, and this is what investors are fearing, it can lead to consumers that are more cautious to spend. So when you take a look at what's happening with the stock market, that's what's going on. That is what's causing this dive, because investors are having all of this fear. And honestly, it could have political ramifications for the president. You'd be naive to think that it couldn't. President Trump has attached himself to the stock market. He's attached himself to the economy. So if the coronavirus can't get under control, this could be very bad news heading into a re-election. It's just how politics works. Fair or not, it's how it works. There's one more thing, though, that I wanted to add to this topic, and then we can move on. There are Democratic lawmakers and Democratic presidential hopefuls that are out there spreading one big lie. They're spreading the lie that this administration is ill prepared for the coronavirus because of all the budget cuts that Trump administration has done. They're saying that there was budget cuts to the National Institutes of Health and the Center for Disease Control Prevention. That's a lie. Those budget cuts never took place. In fact, the budgets have been increased. You had Mike Bloomberg repeating this lie, stating that the president had defunded the CDC. That's false. You had Joe Biden claim that the Obama administration increased those budgets and that the Trump administration wiped it out. Again, that's false. The budgets were increased from where the Obama administration's budgets had them. I wanted to make sure to talk about that because it's a narrative that continues to get thrown out there, and it's false. And it's part of what's adding to this fear that people are having when it's 100% untrue. And the record should be corrected. Let's move on to the Democratic debate that was held on Wednesday. It was probably the biggest, I don't like this word, but it was probably the biggest slugfest to date as far as the Democrats going after Democrats, right? It was also a debate where there were several flat out false statements that were said. And the amazing point is that these candidates were basically allowed to go on stage and say whatever it is that they wanted because the moderators never even attempted to correct these statements. Elizabeth Warren repeated the same debunked claim that she was fired for being pregnant because, victimhood is part of Elizabeth Warren's platform. Listen to this soundbite from the debate.
Mr. Vice President?
I was mentioned in this.
No.
I'd like to respond.
Go ahead, Senator.
He called me out by name and referred to what I talk about as a sideshow. This is personal for me. When I was 21 years old, I got my first job as a special education teacher. I loved that job. And by the end of the first year, I was visibly pregnant. The principal wished me luck and gave my job to someone else. Pregnancy discrimination, you bet. But I was 21 years old. I didn't have a union to protect me, and I didn't have any federal law on my side. So I packed up my stuff, and I went home. At least I didn't have a boss who said to me, kill it, the way that Mayor Bloomberg
never
alleged
said that.
to have said to one of his pregnant employees. People want a chance to hear People want a chance to hear from the women who
I
have
never
worked.
said that.
I want to allow the mayor
for the
an
record, if
opportunity
she
to
was a
respond.
teacher in New York City, she would never have had that problem. We treated our teachers the right way, and the unions will tell you exactly that.
You then have Joe Biden claiming that more than half of the United States has been killed by a firearm. Listen here.
Vice President Biden, I want to start with you. Why should anyone have faith that you're the one who can get this done now?
Because I'm the only one that ever got it done nationally. I beat the NRA twice. I got assault weapons banned. I got magazines that could not hold more than 10 rounds in them. I got them eliminated, except we had a thing called an election with hanging chads in Florida, and it was not reauthorized. In addition to that, I passed the Brady bill with waiting periods. I led that fight. But my friend to my right and others have, in fact, also given to the gun manufacturers absolute immunity. Imagine if I stood here and said we give immunity to drug companies, we give immunity to tobacco companies. That has caused carnage on our streets. 150 million people have been killed since 2007 when Bernie voted to exempt the gun manufacturers from liability. More than all the wars, including Vietnam, from that point on. Carnage on our street. And I want to tell you, if I'm elected and I'm coming for you and gun manufacturers, I'm going to take you on and I'm going to beat you. I'm the only one who's done it.
And the last clip that I'll share from the debate is Bloomberg insisting that President Xi of China is not a dictator. You can't make this up. Listen here to Bloomberg.
Last night, you were criticized by someone on the stage.
I'm shocked. I was criticized.
So it seemed that you might have noticed because you had said that the Chinese leader is not a dictator. Do you stand by that?
Well, it's a question of what you did. What is a dictator? They don't have a democracy in the sense that they have general elections. That is true. They do have a system where a small group of people appoint the head. And they churn over periodically. If you go back and look at the last 2 or 3 decades, there have been a number of people that have had the same position that Xi Jinping has. I think the question is, if your definition is a democracy where people vote and pick their leaders, and that is not what China's about, and they don't seem to want it. They like their system, and I think they're wrong. I think they'd be better off opening things up, having freedom of the press, which they don't have, having lots of different cultures come in. That's the great strength of America. They don't seem to think that. And I think we should work as hard as we can to change that. But you're not going to go to war and try to force them. It is the second biggest economic power, and we should get used to the fact that China is going to keep growing and become stronger, and we have to figure out ways to work with them while protecting our industries and protecting our country militarily.
So if the debate wasn't full of untrue statements, there were also some pretty radical statements that were said. At one point, you had Bernie Sanders saying that he had a plan to help more Latinos, Native Americans, and Black people sell marijuana. He also said his Medicare for All plan would cost $40 billion, not $60 trillion. I worry for him, truly I do, because that math is nowhere close to adding up. Bernie's healthcare plan would bankrupt this country. And honestly, it's especially important to think about Bernie's healthcare plan in times like we are having right now. When we are facing a possible pandemic in this country, what does Medicare for All look like in a situation like the coronavirus? It's really something to think about, especially as Sanders' popularity continues to be on the rise. There was a poll that came out this week from Fox News that said, of all of the 2020 Democratic nominee preferences, Bernie Sanders tops that list at 31%. Joe Biden came in second place at 18%, and Mike Bloomberg at 16%. This is the first time that Bernie Sanders has beat Joe Biden in a national poll. There was another similar poll this week that said 76% of all Democratic voters would vote for a socialist. We live in the United States of America, and you have 76% of people in a major political party saying that they would support a socialist for the president of the United States. That is quite alarming. It makes me think that people don't really know what socialism is, Because if they did, there's not a chance they would vote for a self-proclaimed socialist to run this country. And another question for people out there considering voting for Bernie Sanders is that even on the chance that he does become the nominee and then he goes on to beat Trump in a general election, as president, everything that he is running on would not get passed. Do you think that the House of Representatives and the Senate will approve any of these policy ideas that he has? No, they won't. It will be gridlock. Nothing will get done. It won't just be gridlock from Republicans either. There are 30 plus House members that are very moderate. And them running on moderate policies is what flipped the House from Republican controlled to now Democratic controlled. They flipped the House, not the progressives of the Democratic Party. It was the moderates that flipped the House. Do you really think that all of the moderates in the House, even if the Democrats are able to hold on, will vote for Medicare for all? Or for free college tuition? You think they're going to vote to kick Americans off their private insurance that they all happen to say in all of polling that they like and they want to keep? I mean, we're talking about a man who has held public office for 3 decades. And he has 3 bills that he's written that have become law. 3 bills in 30 years. That is not a strong record of achievement, and that does not sound like a person that should be the leader of the free world. But nonetheless, the Bernie rise continues into Super Tuesday, where he is projected to have a really, really good night. So let's break down Super Tuesday just a bit. Super Tuesday is where 14 states are going to vote, right? It's the biggest voting day yet in this primary season. So more than a third of all the delegates for the Democratic National Convention are up for grabs on Super Tuesday. It is held this Tuesday, so March 3rd, all of these states will begin to vote. There are still going to be other states voting all the way until June, but this is the biggest of them all in a cluster. There's going to be a total of 1,357 delegates that will be given out on Tuesday from all of these 14 voting states. So last week we talked about this nomination being a game of delegates, right? So keep that in mind throughout this primary. It is the delegate total, not the total number of actual votes, that are eventually going to get the candidate the Democratic nomination. So remember, it's the first candidate to get to a majority of the nearly 4,000 delegates. Super Tuesday is a big day in the process, but no candidate, it's important to remember this because no candidate can actually come out with the nomination after Super Tuesday. Doing well is obviously great, and it's going to serve the candidate well because it generally also will narrow down the field of candidates depending on who's done well and who didn't. And at this point, there's been a lot made out of, the first voting states. We had Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada. And then you have South Carolina that's actually voting today as we do this. People are voting. But to put it in perspective, even after today's vote in South Carolina, that will still mean that only 5% of the delegates have been given. So after Super Tuesday, it's going to be closer to 38% of all of them. In South Carolina, it's a must win for Joe Biden. And according to Biden, he is guaranteeing a win in that state. Listen here.
To win South Carolina, and I will win the African-American vote here in South Carolina.
Mr. Biden, will you continue if you do not win South Carolina? You have said that South Carolina will determine the outcome of this presidential race. If you don't win South Carolina, will you continue in this race?
I will win South Carolina.
All right, sir.
So polling is actually consistent with what Biden is saying here. He is projected to have a very, very good night in South Carolina. So prepare for next week, the narrative from the media to shift and talk about the big comeback from Joe Biden. He's going to win South Carolina, and it's going to be this big comeback story. And honestly, even if he does not win all states on Super Tuesday, he's going to receive a fairly big amount of delegates. Bernie is projected to take the majority of delegates allotted on Super Tuesday, but Joe Biden is projected to come in second place with the largest share of delegates. And now, the big talk amongst the Democratic Party is that there's really a lot of fear behind a Bernie Sanders win. I talked about this last week, And I do believe that they are underestimating his support and his appeal. But there was this report that came out of the New York Times last week saying that they have interviewed 93 party officials. All of those party officials are also superdelegates. The superdelegates ultimately have a say in who gets this nomination at the convention, right? So reportedly, out of those 93 party officials, there was overwhelming opposition to giving Bernie Sanders the nomination, even if he had the most delegates. Nancy Pelosi was asked about this during a press conference, and here is what she had to say.
Unity, unity, unity. Whoever our nominee is, we will support with respect for his or her positions and hopefully with their respect for our positions as well. So we have made a decision to win. And as I say to the members, if you make a decision to win, you have to make every subsequent decision to win. No friction, no nothing. Just stay on the path to victory because it's so very important. Our country is a great country. It's a great country. It's so resilient that it could even withstand one term of Donald Trump. 2 terms and the damage that he's doing to the rule of law, the court system in our country, the air our children breathe, the denial of climate and the rest. Just time will take a toll. So it's absolutely essential that we win. Whoever the nominee is will have our wholehearted support. Unity, unity, unity. We've made a decision to win.
So Nancy Pelosi is saying here basically that we just need to win, right? It was reported last week that she told nervous moderate members that if they needed to distance themselves from Bernie Sanders in order to win their races, that they have her full support in doing that. That really they just needed to win. And again, this also goes back to what we talked about last week. If Bernie wins, it will give the Democrats the power back. And ultimately, that's what they want. Even if it means nothing he is running on that's actually going to be what secures him a victory ever gets passed. They don't care if it gets passed. They want the power. They would then control the White House again. And ultimately, of course, that's what they're all going for. There was part of the Fox News polls that were released on Friday, so yesterday, which was really interesting, that 20% of Democrats say that they would not support Bernie Sanders over President Trump. That's a big deal. Bernie has a strong base, right? He's got a very strong base. It's similar to what Trump's base looked like in 2016, or 2015 rather. And it's stronger than most people give him credit for. But he needs more. He needs more than that. He needs the entire Democratic Party to get behind him. Trump does well because his support amongst Republicans is always around 90 to 95%. That's where he hovers. That's usually where he's at. So he has the Republican Party behind him. That is important. You have to have the party, because then you also need to gain independents, as we all know. So you need your party, and then you're also going to have to try to pick off some of those independents. So if Bernie Sanders gets the nomination, he needs all of the Democrats behind him. So a poll showing that 20% of his own party would vote for Trump over him, not to mention the people that choose not to vote at all because they're not excited about a socialist, does not bode well for Bernie Sanders. It doesn't bode well, and that is what has Democrats nervous. But that is it for me today. Unfortunately, I am out of time, but next week I hope you'll tune back in as we go through all of the Super Tuesday results and all of the latest in politics. Have a good afternoon, guys.
This has been the Beth Cahill Show. If you have any feedback for Beth or would like to suggest a future topic or guest for the show, email beth@thebethcahillshow.com. That's Beth at the Beth Cahill, spelled Cahill show.com. Tune in again next Saturday morning at 9 for more of the Beth Cahill Show, right here on AM 1590. The Answer.